Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As you know that we are doing a series on EC2 instances hands-on, and this is yet another video in that particular series, and in this video we are going to see how we can host multiple websites on a single EC2 instance, right? So let us see what we are going to study from this video. So first of all, we will be provisioning secondary private IP addresses and the elastic IP addresses to our EC2 instances, right? So in order to allow multiple websites or multiple web page to run on your one EC2 instance, we will be requiring elastic IP addresses or the private IP addresses for the same. So we're going to see how we can provision them. Next, we will be actually learning how to get our secondary IP recognized by our operating systems, because when we launch an EC2 instance, it is provided with a single public IP and a single private IP, right? So after that, what happens? We have to make them recognize with our, the underlying operating system of our EC2 instance. So we're going to see how we can do that. Next thing is that then we will be creating our two different web pages on our Apache web server, and this we have actually seen beforehand also, and then we will be actually associating those web page with our different elastic IP, and with those elastic IPs we will be actually making those web page run, right? So before starting the hands-on, let us first understand the importance of having multiple IP addresses associated with our EC2 instance. Right. So there are multiple uses of having more than one elastic IP address. First of all, elastic IP address is a static IP address that is associated with our EC2 instances. We know that when we stop our instance, the public IP of our instance get lost, right? So what we have to do, we have to associate our EC2 instance with an elastic IP so that it can stay permanent with our EC2 instance, right? So we can have multiple IP addresses, multiple private IP addresses, as well as multiple elastic IP addresses associated with our EC2 instance. So it has a lot of uses. So first of all, we can use them to host multiple website on a single server, which we are actually going to view in this particular video using multiple SSL certificates. We won't be requiring these certificates because we will be just doing this as a hands-on, and when we do it in real life, that will be requiring actually the secure socket layer certificates also, but we can host multiple websites. For that we will be requiring the multiple IP addresses, or we can use them to operate network appliances such as firewall or a load balancer that can have multiple IP address for each network interface. We can also use multiple IPs to redirect internal traffic to a standby instance in case any instance get failed, right? So in case of failure, we can reassign the secondary IP address to a standby instance so that we can mask that particular failure. So this will be a little long hands-on, and it will be having a lot of steps to follow. So let us start and go to our AWS management console. Now we are in our AWS's management console, and our first step will be to install an EC2 instance with an Apache web server. So this we have already seen in our previous videos, so I shall be doing the same steps but in a quicker manner. So I do not have any EC2 instance running right now, so I will be launching one instance. Linux 2 AMI. The instance type will be T2 micro. All the details will be default, but in the place of user data, I will be using the script to install, start and enable HTTPD server, that is the Apache web server. This is the user data that we have used in a lot of videos before also, right? So this is the user data, which is, I think, do not having any error, right? So add storage, I won't be requiring any storage. Add tags, yes. So the name of my EC2 instance will be multiple web server, right? So it will be hosting multiple websites. So I have named it like this. And because the Apache web server is working, so I need port 80 to be enabled. So I'm just selecting a security group which has port 22, port 443 and port 80 enabled over it. That is SSH, HTTP and HTTPS. Review and launch. So I think everything is fine. Launching the instance with my existing key, that is my Linux key, and launch. So now what I have done is I have installed an Apache web server on an EC2 instance, and the instance is being launching right now. So I will be clicking on view instances, and yes, the new instance is launching. And after some time, this will be, converted into running state. So now the instance is running. Select your EC2 instance, go to your public IP, open up a new tab, and just copy paste your public IP over here and press enter, and you can see that the test page of Apache is working very fine. Right. So that was the first step where we have just launched our EC2 instance. Now you can see that with our EC2 instance, if I click on the information related to it, I have only one public IP associated with it, one private IP address associated with it, and I do not have any other IP addresses right now, right? So Elastic IP address is also showing dash, right? It is blank. So now the next step will be associate one more private IP addresses to my EC2 instance. So keeping my instance selected, I will be going to the actions, networking, and manage IP addresses, right? So you will be coming on this page, that is manage IP addresses, right? So clicking on this, you can see that one private IP addresses is actually assigned to your EC2 instance, and now I will be just clicking on assign new IP address, right? So I will be giving it an customized IP address. So just copy the above IP, and you can give 120, right? So I have given this IP address in sync with this one, and just click on save and confirm, right? So just refresh it once, and now you can see that you have successfully completed the request of actually assigning a secondary IP address to your EC2 instance. So now, how we can actually see that the IP addresses have actually been associated with your EC2 instance or not? For that we have certain commands. So for that case I have to SSH into my EC2 instance, right? So I will be going to connect and copying this command over here, opening my PowerShell and pasting it over here, and now I will be logged into my EC2 instance, right? So now I am in my EC2 instance, right? So now I will be checking how many private IP addresses are associated with my EC2 instance, right? So I will be changing this permission to the super user, right? And for checking how many IP addresses are actually associated or recognized by your operating system, you can enter the command IP ADDR space LI, right? And if you press enter, you can see that over here there is only one private IP that is associated with your EC2 instance. So there is no other IP address. But now you have seen that I have assigned another IP address that was 220, right? Dot 220. Everything was same, but the end was 220. But you can see that there is no such entry over here. Only one IP is visible. So what we have to do, we have to make it actually realize the operating system that yes, now it have two private IP addresses, right? So for that, what you have to do, you have to type another command. That means you have to restart your service network, right? So what you have to do, you have to restart your network. So for that, you have to type sudo service network restart, right, and enter. Right, so it is restarting the system and it's working very fine. Now you can use this command again, that is IP addrli, and press enter, and now you can see that it has two IPs showing. One is 172.31.29 and 218, and the next one is with 220, right? So now what we have done, we have actually made our operating system recognize my secondary IP. Now at this point of time, we are in a state to use both the private IP addresses of our EC2 instance. So this step is really mandatory. So now coming back to our management console and to our instance, and so with this we have completed the second step, that is we have associated our EC2 instance with two private IPs. So what I actually need is I need to make a note of these two private IPs for my reference purpose, right? So I'm just copying the one IP address and paste it over here, and I will also be copying the second IP, which is 220, right, and paste it over here also. So these are my two private IP addresses, right? The second step will be allocating multiple elastic IP address with your EC2 instance. So on the left hand side of the tab, go to network and security, click on elastic IPs. As you can see that I do not have any elastic IP address in this region, so I will be allocating one. So click on allocate elastic IP address. The region is fine, everything is set to by default, and allocate one elastic IP. Right, so you can see that one IP address is now being allocated in this particular region. But we have to host two websites, right? So we will be requiring one more elastic IP. So go again to allocate elastic IP and allocate one more to it, right? So now you can see that I have allocated two elastic IP addresses in this region, but yet these elastic IPs are not associated with any instance. So the next step will be to associate elastic IPs with my EC2 instance. So stay on this page only, right? Select one of the elastic IP, go to actions and click on associate elastic IP address, right? So I am associating this elastic IP with my instance, and the instance will be my multiple web server, and here I will be choosing one of my private IP address. So remember, one elastic IP for one private IP, right? So for this particular elastic IP, I am selecting my first private IP address, right? And I am just associating with it, right? So remember that for this elastic IP, if I copy it, right, I have associated it with my first private IP address. So I am just making a note of it, right? Now, so now you can see that one of my IP, that is this 55 one, is associated with my instance. Now associate the second elastic IP with your instance. So go to actions, associate elastic IP, and this time select your instance only, and this time map it with your secondary IP address, right? So this is my secondary IP address, and click on associate, right? So again make a note of it that this particular elastic IP is mapped with my secondary IP address, right? So I have just copied it down over here also, right? So now you can see that both of my elastic IPs are actually now associated with my EC2 instance. Now, so what the next step we are going to do is we are going to, again SSH into our EC2 instance on which the Apache HTTP server was installed, and now we will be creating two different web pages, right? So for that, go back to your the EC2 instance and just and you can see that it will be now not be working. Remember that here we have SSH into our EC2 instance with its public IP, that is 54.167 something, right? 54.167 something. But now if you go to your EC2 instance and you can see that the public IP of your EC2 instance, if you refresh it, the public IP of your EC2 instance has been just changed, right? It has to be mapped as an elastic IP with one of your elastic IP, right? So you are no longer able to, SSH into your EC2 instance. So what you can do is you can just open up a new PowerShell. Go to the place where the key is actually stored, that is on desktop. Again, go back to your EC2 instance, click on connect, and now this time the SSH IP has been changed to your elastic IP. Copy it, and now you are into your EC2 instance. So now what you have done, you have actually been logged into your EC2 instance with the help of your elastic IP. Right. So it's working fine right now. The next thing what we have to do, we have to actually create two different web pages over here. So now I will be just switching again back to my super user and just changing my directory to slash html, right? So we will be actually changing ourselves to this particular directory. So go to cd var www/html, right, and enter. So you can see that now I am in this particular directory. So now I will be creating another folder into it actually. So my folder will be mkdir, and the folder name will be web page 1, right? And I will be going cd web page 1, creating a new folder, and in this folder I will be making another web page, right? So open vim index.html, just open a text editor and enter, right? And here I shall be clicking I so that I can be able to write over it. This is just like your this is your vi editor actually. So in order to write something you have to press I on your keyboard, and you can see the this is in the insert mode, right? So here I have html code written over here for my web page 1. So just copy it and paste it here, right? So just paste your data over here and switch your escape mode, go to WQ and enter, right? So now that is the thing we are going to do again with the second page. Exit, I think that will work, right? Then again switch to sudo user su, and now this time I have to again go to that HTML directory that was this, right? And now I will be creating one more folder in it by the name of HTML, that is web page 2, right? So I will be just actually making web page 2 directory again, and this time I will be getting into web page 2 directory, like cd web page 2, right? And here again I will be opening vim index.html, right? Clicking I so that I can get into the insert mode, and this time changing this to 2, and just copy it again and paste it, right? And press escape to save : WQ and enter. Type exit so that you can get out of that particular directory, right? So what I have actually done over here is that I have created two different folders or two different directories in which I have created two different index.html pages, right? Now going back to our management console, and you can see that the public IP address of your EC2 instance has now been changed, right? So you can select any one of the elastic IP, right? Open up a new URL and just paste it over here and press enter, and you can see that the Apache's test page is working very fine. Now we will be checking that whether the two web pages that we have made are working fine or not. So slash yes, it is web page 2, so I will be just changing it to 1 first, right? So web page 1 slash index HTML, enter, and you can see that the web page 1 is working very fine. And here I will be just checking my second web page, that is 2, whether it's working fine or not, and yes, it is also working very fine. So this is our third step that we have created two different web pages on our Apache web server. Right. Now our task is to associate one elastic IP with one web page and another elastic IP with the another web page, right? For that, what we have to do, going back to our PowerShell, and just I will be clearing each and everything and type exit so that we can get out of that particular mode. Yes, right. So now what I have to do over here, I have to modify the httpd.config file, right? So for that, again, the permission should be of super user, right? And I shall be going into the directory where the httpd underscore config file is there, right? So what I will be doing is I will be doing cd etc httpd and conf, right, and enter, right? And I will be doing ls minus l so that we can visualize that whether that file is there or not. Yes. So what we are going to do over here is we will be modifying this httpd.conf file, and here we will be mapping our elastic IPs with our web pages, right? So let me just open the file, that is with the editor nano httpd.conf, or you can also open it in Vim editor, rather httpd.conf, right, and enter. Right, so this is the file, and find out where there is the virtual host tag, right? So the virtual host tag, I am just searching it. Here it is. So here is the virtual host tag over here, right? So press I so that you can actually insert your code over here. This is the code with which we are going to map our private IP addresses to one of our web page, that is the web page 1, right? So I will be providing the this code in the description so that you can copy it from there. And I have written IP addresses in two places over here, right? So what I have to do over here, I have to mention one of my private IP address, right? That is this one, which is mapped to this elastic IP address for my web page 1, right? So copy your first private IP address, right, and paste it here and here, right? And then copy the whole code, go back to your conf file and paste it over here, right? So you have pasted one of the private IP code over here, right? And now I have to do the same thing with the another IP address, right? So going back to my second notepad, and here this will be for my web page 2, right? So copy up one of your secondary private IP, copy it here and go back to here, change the IP in the two places, one over here and second over here, and everywhere where you have used web page 1, change it to 2. So everywhere where that was your web page 1, change that to 2, right? So I have changed each and everything and I think it's working fine. Make sure it should not have any errors, right? So secondary IP, web page 2, web page 2, web page 2 and correct. So just copy it again, go back to your conf file and just paste the second code also. Just check it once, it should not have any errors, right? So here what we did, we actually mapped our private IP addresses with our web page, and here you can say that the private IP is mapped with this and this. So you can assume that your elastic IP addresses are mapped to your web pages as transitive relationship, right? So going back to your conf file, pressing escape colon WQ and enter. So now what you have done, actually you have actually associated your private IPs with your web pages, right? So before actually starting the your web pages with your IP address, you have to stop and restart the HTTPD server. So type systemctl stop HTTPD, right? And then you have to start HTTPD again. So HTTPD. And yes, so you have actually did the particular thing that you have now associated your private IPs with your elastic IP, in turn with your web pages, right? So if I do remove this O from here and enter, so you can see that with this elastic IP we are still able to visualize our web page 1, right? And you can cross verify that with this 55 elastic IP1 we have associated our web page 1. Now just copy the another elastic IP, right? Go to the URL and paste it here. This is my second elastic IP, and if I enter over here, you can see that with the second elastic IP, now I am able to visualize my web page too. So with this particular thing, we have completed the last step, with which we have seen that how we can host multiple websites on a single EC2 instance. I know that this hands-on was a little longer, but I hope that it is somehow useful to you guys. And for more such videos, stay tuned to my channel. Thank you.